They planted landmines in your peace, expecting you to explode, but you learned to walk like smoke, quiet and untouchable. And now they're choking on the silence you left behind. You didn't scream, you didn't beg, you didn't give them the meltdown they wanted so badly. No, you studied their chaos, walked through their traps, and exited with the elegance of a ghost, untouchable, unreadable, unforgettable. They thought they were triggering a war. What they got was a silent genius, disappearing mid-sentence like smoke through cracks they never knew existed. No curtain call, no final scene, just gone. They didn't see the months you spent smiling through clenched teeth. They didn't notice you shrinking piece by piece just to keep their storms calm. They didn't think you had the nerve, the plan, or the power to leave. But guess what? You did. And you executed it like an artist. You didn't just walk away. You vanished with precision, not out of fear, but out of clarity. You didn't react. You orchestrated, like a final scene in a film so well written it leaves the whole theater in shock. You flipped the script while they were still rehearsing their lines. That's not weakness. That's genius. That's legendary. And before we go deeper, let's get this message where it belongs, in the hands of every soul who needs to hear it. If this is hitting your heart, tap like, press subscribe, and help spread this message. You're not just watching this for you, you're holding a match someone else needs to light their path. So do your part. Spread the signal. It's not just content, it's survival. Now, let's talk about who you really are. You're not just the chosen one because the universe gave you some lucky favor. No, you became the chosen one because you chose yourself when no one else did. You were the light in their shadows, the peace in their storm. And they mistook your patience for permission. That was their biggest mistake. They thought they broke you, but they just sharpened you. Every insult became a blueprint. Every lie became fuel. Every fake hug taught you how to hug yourself tighter. And when the day came, you didn't blow up. You leveled up. You played your role so well, they never saw it coming. You smiled through betrayal. You laughed with liars. You sat at tables where you knew you weren't safe, all while planning your exit like a silent assassin. And when it was time to go, you didn't look back. You didn't give them closure. You gave them consequences. You knew they'd try to spin the story, paint you as the villain, twist your silence into guilt. But let them. The truth is too big for small minds. And real power, it doesn't need to explain itself. It moves, and the world watches. Psychologists say people don't truly change unless they're faced with enough pain or enough clarity. You had both. And instead of letting it destroy you, you turned it into a performance so flawless, even your enemies had to applaud in secret. That's why the title fits. You didn't just leave. You deserve an Oscar for how you did it. They don't know where you went. They don't know who you are anymore. And that's the most powerful part. They lost access to the version of you they took for granted. You cut them off like dead weight. And now you're floating lighter, higher, and quieter than they ever imagined possible. No closure, no contact, no crumbs, just elevation. And if you're still in that silent planning stage, listen closely. You don't need to explode. You don't need to perform. You just need to walk like smoke, quiet, invisible, and impossible to stop. Because when you disappear with a plan, you don't just leave them behind. You leave them haunted. So if this message is hitting you like a memory you've tried to forget, good. That means it's yours. You didn't just survive what they did. You outsmarted it, outgrew it, and outplayed every trap they set. And now you're here, not by chance, but by precision. Drop the number 77 in the comments if you know your exit wasn't luck. It was a masterclass. Stay locked in, because what's coming next will feel like a mirror to your past and a blueprint for your rise. If you're really the chosen one, you'll feel it in your bones. Let's get into it. Number 1. They were so busy playing you. They didn't notice they were walking into a psychological guillotine. You gave them all the rope, then watched them tie their own noose with it while smiling at you like they won. They thought they had you cornered, trapped, owned. They believed you were too emotional, too loyal, too dependent to ever leave. And while they were dancing in circles, drunk on their fake power, you were setting the stage, like a quiet storm dressing in silk, waiting to tear the sky apart. You didn't just walk away, you built a psychological guillotine and let them stroll into it blindfolded. Because that's what real power looks like. It's not about explosions, it's about precision. It's about letting them underestimate you until it's too damn late. They didn't know the person they thought they broke was busy building a map. Every silent night, you were calculating. Every fake apology, you logged it like a scientist. Every little shift in their mask, you caught it, while they thought you were too naive to see the cracks. But you saw everything and said nothing, because the quiet ones are the most dangerous. They ask now, how could you just leave like that? But let's be real, you didn't just leave. You waited, you observed. You learned the game better than the ones who invented it. You had to be calm while on fire. You had to act okay while your heart was breaking in private. And you played it so well, they never saw the exit plan taped behind your back. You weren't being weak, you were being tactical. That dinner you sat through while they lied to your face. That call you answered when you already knew the truth. That smile you gave while they bragged about controlling you. That wasn't submission. That was you letting them dig deeper so your silence could be louder later. People think silence is passive, but not in your case. Your silence was a loaded weapon, and when the time came, you didn't miss. You were never begging. You were never blind. You were building. You were setting emotional booby traps so subtle, so precise, that they walked into their own destruction, thinking they were still in charge. You let them talk. You let them gloat. You let them think you were still emotionally accessible, while your soul was already halfway into a new dimension. That's what makes your exit poetic. It wasn't just walking away, it was psychological chess. They played checkers, you studied war. They'll never tell the full truth about you, because doing so would mean admitting they got outplayed. You weren't the fool, you were the blueprint. And now they're sitting in the ruins, blaming the storm, without realizing it was their own actions that triggered the earthquake. And let's address the question that creeps in late at night. But what if I was too cold, too harsh, too quiet? Stop. That's the leftover residue of manipulation talking. You were not too cold. You were finally clear. You were not too harsh. You were finally honest. You were not too quiet. You were finally focused. And when clarity enters, confusion has no place to hide. You let the truth expose them without needing to speak it. That's why they're mad. That's why they're shook. You didn't slam the door. You left it cracked, so they'd hear the silence echo every time they reach for you and find nothing. You let them talk themselves into circles. You didn't interrupt. You didn't correct. You just watched the mask slip. And when it hit the floor, you were already gone. They'll swear you changed, that you flipped, that you became someone else. But you didn't. You returned to yourself. You became someone they could no longer manipulate. And that's why they can't stand you now, because the puppet cut the strings and became the puppeteer. Even when you were crying behind closed doors, you were planning. Even when you felt broken, you were gathering your pieces like weapons. They thought you were folding, but baby, you were forging. And when the final act arrived, you didn't just exit. You erased your presence like a ghost with unfinished business finally resolved. No warning, no last fight, no final goodbye. You left them holding conversations with your absence. Because some exits don't need closure. They are the closure. And now they're scrambling, digging through old texts, replaying old moments, hoping for another scene, another chance, another crack in the wall you've rebuilt. But the show is over. And the star. She took her Oscar and left. So if you're reading this and you're still in that quiet phase, still playing your part, still gathering data, still wearing the mask they gave you, let this be your sign. You're not being fake. You're being strategic. You're not stuck. You're just in the planning phase. And when the moment comes, move like smoke, leave like thunder, cut like ice, and let them drown in the echo of everything they thought they controlled. You didn't just walk away. You designed their downfall with the grace of an artist and the mind of an assassin. And that's what makes you a chosen one. Not because you were lucky, but because you were lethal in silence. And baby, silence never misses. Number 2. They thought you were escaping, but you were delivering the final blow without saying a word. You didn't run away. You walked out like a surgeon, steady hands, cold precision, and a silence so sharp it sliced the lie wide open. Let's get this straight. What you did wasn't escape. It was execution, and not the emotional kind they tried to provoke. This wasn't you breaking down. This wasn't some impulsive, messy meltdown they could twist into a sob story where they get to play the victim. No, this was you pulling the pin and calmly walking away from the bomb they built, letting it blow in their hands after you were long gone. They didn't realize it at first. You left without drama, no screaming, no scenes, no sobbing messages. Just a shift, a chill in the air, the sudden absence of your energy, like the moment the music cuts in a horror movie right before the monster appears. And that silence, that's what scared them. You knew what would come next. The spin, the lies, the subtle jabs, the whispered stories designed to make you look crazy, unstable, ungrateful. You knew they'd try to rewrite the ending, so you crafted your exit like a slow-burning truth bomb, undeniable, irreversible, untwistable. This wasn't about being the loudest voice. This was about being the last honest one, because when all the noise dies down, all that's left is reality. And your reality. It was ugly and raw and real, and you chose not to waste another breath trying to prove it to people who were never listening. You just moved different, talked less, observed more, and while they were still performing, you were already packing your soul into a bag marked freedom. They didn't notice at first. They thought they still had access to you, still had control, still had time. But you were already gone, emotionally evacuated, while your body played the role just long enough to finish the mission. You didn't scream. You waited. You didn't call them out. You let them perform. Because truth doesn't need a defense when dysfunction is on full display. They exposed themselves. You just left the lights on long enough for the world to see it. People ask, but don't you want to clear your name? Don't you care what they're saying? Let them talk. Let them twist. because the truth has a funny way of surviving the spin. Give it time, and it will rise from the ashes like smoke from the wreckage they created, pointing straight back to them. You understood this. Revenge isn't fire. Revenge is clarity served on a cold, silent plate. And when the fog clears and the performance ends, all that's left is the aftermath. And that's where your real victory sits, untouched, unbothered, undeniable. You didn't burn bridges. You walked off them like royalty while they lit the matches and pretended to cry about the smoke. You didn't ruin their name. You let their behavior speak, and it spoke volumes, louder than any call-out, sharper than any clapback. And real ones, they heard it. They saw the shift. They felt the tension that didn't come from you, but from the void you left behind. See, they wanted the explosion. They wanted the chaos, because in chaos they could spin the story, control the narrative, hide behind the confusion. But you starved them of conflict, starved them of attention, starved them of the opportunity to paint you as unstable. And that was brutal, because without your reaction, they had nothing. No content, no drama, just their own guilt echoing back at them in the silence. But don't you want to confront them? Confront what? They already know what they did. They know why you left. They're just hoping to drag you back in so they can rewrite the ending and still look innocent. But you refuse to give them another scene. The movie's over. Roll credits. And now they're haunted, not by what you said, but by what you didn't say, by the things left unsaid, by the story they can't control. Because when you leave without explaining, without defending, without warning, they're left alone with the truth. And the truth, it doesn't blink. Your exit wasn't emotional. It was forensic. You didn't run. You documented. You didn't just survive. You prepared the case file, knowing one day the receipts would speak louder than your voice ever could. And now, people who once called you too much are slowly realizing you were too real. People who once sided with the show are now asking questions they never thought to ask. And every lie they told is starting to sweat under the spotlight you never even turned on. The spotlight called karma. That's why they're still checking your page, still stalking your energy, still sending accidental messages. Because they don't miss you. They miss the control. They miss the version of you that tolerated what should have never been tolerated. But that version, gone, deceased, buried in the ashes of their own manipulation. And now they're left trying to explain why someone so unstable was smart enough to leave without a trace, and strong enough not to come back. So if you're reading this, second-guessing your silence, wondering if you should have said more, screamed louder, fought harder, don't. You didn't escape. You executed, and you did it with elegance, precision, and power. You didn't need revenge. You became the evidence. You became the closure. You became the chapter they'll never understand, but never forget. And that's the true power of your exit. It wasn't rage. It wasn't weakness. It was the calmest war they never saw coming, and the loudest truth they still can't silence. Number 3, you knew they were watching, so you made sure your exit burned into their memory like a scene they'll replay forever. When they expected your breakdown, you gave them a broadcast, not with words, with silence that screamed louder than any revenge plot they've ever imagined. They thought they were watching you collapse. Instead, they got front-row seats to your rise. You knew their eyes were on you, lurking, scrolling, checking your page in the shadows like ghosts in their own guilt. And you didn't flinch, you didn't rant, you didn't plead, you didn't drag them in the mud like they expected. You turned your exit into a performance so cold, so composed, it burned more than any outburst ever could. You weren't just walking away, you were broadcasting growth in real time. But here's the genius: you didn't show everything, you gave them just enough. A glow-up here, a new boundary there, a smile they hadn't seen since before they drained you. You gave them fragments and let their paranoia stitch the rest together. That was the trap. You weren't loud, but you were visible. You weren't posting revenge, you were living it. Your silence made more noise than their lies ever could. They tried to paint you as the unstable one, the emotional wreck, the one who'd come crawling back. But you kept your chin up and your energy clean. And with every move you made, every peace-filled post, every step forward, the audience started to question the script they'd been fed. That wasn't luck, that was strategy, that was legacy, that was you turning your pain into proof. And look at history, the real chosen ones always got watched. Malcolm X was surveilled for years by those who feared the power of his clarity. Nina Simone was labeled angry when she was just awake. Princess Diana broke free from the most watched prison in the world, a royal system, and turned every camera lens into a mirror that exposed the truth. You're not just walking away, you're walking into the light, and they can't bear to see you shine, because your shine confirms their shadow. People ask, should I show them I'm happy? You don't have to show them anything, just be. The ones watching will feel what's real. Your peace doesn't need subtitles. Your silence doesn't need a mic. What hurt them wasn't your absence, it was your evolution. They expected chaos. You gave them composure. They expected tears. You gave them transformation. And now they're watching every day, not because they care, but because they lost. And your growth is the scoreboard. Keep broadcasting, not for revenge, but for revelation. Number 4, you let them dance in delusion while you were writing the final scene they'd never recover from. They thought they were still playing the game, but you were already holding the scoreboard, and they were losing in silence. They mistook your silence for weakness, your stillness for confusion, your loyalty for dependency. But what they didn't know was this: you were playing a deeper game, and baby, you were already 10 moves ahead. They thought they still had you, hooked, hurt, helpless. They didn't realize that the version of you they were mocking had already begun dying and being reborn in the middle of their chaos. While they were busy playing God in a broken empire, you were quietly becoming the storm they wouldn't survive. You didn't fight back because you were scared. You held your fire because you understood the power of restraint. Emotional impulsiveness is what they thrive on. It gives them control. So instead, you played possum, still, calm, watching. And every time they pushed your buttons, you pressed record in your mind. Every gaslight, every "you're too sensitive," every "I was just joking," logged, noted, filed. You weren't shrinking, you were scanning the whole battlefield. While they were laughing at the version of you who used to chase clarity, you were sealing their fate with every "okay," every fake smile. Every time you said nothing was everything. That's what they'll never understand. You let them think they were still in control because exposing your hand too early would have ruined the whole show. So you sat in the front row, letting them perform their lies with confidence, while inside you were sharpening your exit plan like a sword they'd never see coming. You gave them nothing to twist, no breakdown, no rage, no aha moment they could screenshot and share. You gave them the most terrifying gift of all, pure, surgical silence. And the silence wasn't empty, it was loaded. You were archiving, you were healing, you were upgrading your self-worth like software running in the background, invisible but unstoppable. Look at history. Harriet Tubman pretended to be powerless while planning escape routes for dozens. Nelson Mandela spent decades in prison mastering internal strength so unbreakable it would one day help dismantle apartheid. They didn't scream, they watched, they waited, and when the time came, they moved, and the world shifted. That's what you did. You didn't explode. You evolved. And when you finally left, you didn't just cut them off. You erased the access. No warning, no last words, just a clean break that echoed louder than any fight could have. They didn't even get the chance to play the victim properly because you gave them no scene to distort. Just a locked door and a silence they can't decode. Now they're haunted, not just because you're gone, but because you were never who they thought you were to begin with. You were the quiet genius, hiding your brilliance behind calm eyes. You were the mirror, and they broke themselves trying to break you. And if you're still in that stage, still pretending, still watching, still building your exit quietly, hear this. You are not fake. You are focused. You are not stuck. You are loading. And when the final moment comes, don't flinch, don't warn, don't explain, just walk. Let the truth speak in your absence, and let them drown in the silence they never prepared for. Because while they were clapping for their own illusion of power, you were writing the ending that makes them the villain, and you the legend. And legends don't beg. They vanish with dignity, with receipts, and with every ounce of peace they were never worthy of. Number 5. You let them judge the cover while you were writing the ending that left them speechless. They mistook your softness for surrender, not realizing you were using every one of their assumptions as camouflage while building your exit like a secret weapon. They thought they had you figured out from the start. They labeled you emotional, weak, too soft, too lost in your feelings to ever stand up and walk away. But what they didn't realize was that you wanted them to think that, because their overconfidence, that was your cover, that was your cloak, that was your greatest advantage. While they were strutting around, convinced they held all the power, you were quietly slipping every single emotional lock off the door, one by one, behind their back. They thought they were still playing puppet master, but the strings had long since snapped, and all they were holding was air. They say, never let them see you sweat. But you did one better. You let them think you couldn't even hold a knife while you were sharpening it behind your back. You weaponized every assumption they threw at you. You made your innocence a strategy, your silence a smokescreen, your softness a setup. You wore your confusion like a costume. You let the tears fall, not as surrender, but as a tactic. Because you knew nothing makes a narcissist drop their guard faster than feeling like they've already won. And that's what made it poetic. They were blindfolded by their own ego. Their own assumptions built a wall between them and the truth. And you used every brick they handed you to build the tunnel that led to your freedom. You never had to fight for the upper hand. They handed it to you while mocking your power. You let them monologue, let them gloat, let them play hero in a story where they were always the villain, because you weren't arguing anymore. You were archiving every lie, every contradiction, every fake apology. You stored it all like evidence in a courtroom that hadn't opened yet. They thought you were silent because you had nothing to say. But no, you were silent because you knew everything they were about to reveal. And you were giving them the space to do it, comfortably, carelessly, until the mask fell all on its own. And when you left, you didn't throw a fit. You didn't give them closure, you gave them consequences. It wasn't just your exit that shook them, it was how wrong they were about you. They were so busy underestimating your strength, they didn't see the storm coming. And when it hit, they couldn't even explain it. Because how do you explain being outplayed by someone you swore was too weak to think for themselves? Let's talk facts. History remembers the underestimated. People thought Joan of Arc was just a girl with a vision until she led armies. They laughed at Rosa Parks for being just tired, and she sparked a movement. Malala was silenced with a bullet and came back louder than ever. Real power doesn't need to flex. It waits, it watches, and when it strikes, it rewrites history. So if you're sitting in silence now, letting them assume you're still broken, still lost, still trying to figure it all out, good. Let them think it. Because every second they underestimate you is a second they're not preparing for your rise. And when you move, you won't have to scream. The shift in your energy will do the talking. You didn't walk away by accident. You escaped like an architect who designed the blueprint beneath their feet while they were laughing at your pain. You were never the victim. You were the strategist, the observer, the one who let them misread you on purpose. And now they're left replaying the moment they lost you, still trying to figure out how someone they called too emotional ended up being the one who outmaneuvered everything. You didn't fight their assumptions, you used them as camouflage. And when the time came, you disappeared like a ghost who knew exactly where every door led. Because you built the damn house, and they never saw it coming. Number 6, you let their ego blind them while you slipped out the back door holding every piece of your power. You didn't escape a narcissist. You let them stay obsessed with their own reflection while you vanished from the mirror completely. The secret to outsmarting a narcissist isn't fighting them. It's feeding the illusion, just enough for them to lose sight of you. And you played that role like a master. You didn't just leave them. You let their own ego build the distraction while you planned the escape. You realized something early. Trying to confront their ego was like trying to argue with a fire. All it does is burn hotter the more oxygen you give it. So instead, you cut off the oxygen, quietly, strategically. While they were too busy performing their greatness for the crowd, you were slipping out of the role of audience, bit by bit, applause by fake applause. You didn't challenge their delusions. You used them. You let them believe they were the smartest, the strongest, the center of your emotional universe, all while you were withdrawing your spirit, thought by thought. They were addicted to admiration, and you were the dealer. They never questioned you because they were too high on their own reflection to notice that your mirror had gone dark. They thought you were clapping for them, when in reality you were just keeping the show running long enough to gather the intel. They didn't suspect you because they didn't see you. They only saw the version of you they created in their head, the one who needed them, praised them, chased them. That version, you let it die quietly while you watched them unravel in slow motion. You weren't passive. You were present in the sharpest, most terrifying way. While they performed their grand illusions of perfection to family, to friends, to strangers online, you were the one person in the room who knew the truth behind the curtain. And instead of yelling, you watched. And instead of warning, you waited. You watched them gaslight and deny, blame and project. You watched them rewrite your emotions, minimize your pain, and twist every confrontation into confusion. And you took notes, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. You became a walking archive of truth. And they didn't suspect a thing because their narcissism was the blindfold they willingly wore. They couldn't see your detachment because they were never truly connected to begin with. They weren't in love with you, they were in love with your admiration. And when your admiration dried up, when the sparkle in your eye dimmed, they assumed it was just another mood swing. Because surely you couldn't be leaving. You needed them too much, or so they thought. And that's what broke them. When you finally left, not with rage, not with drama, not with begging, but with cold, calculated distance, they were stunned. Not because they realized what they lost, but because their best audience just stopped clapping. The echo of that silence, it haunts them because now they're left looking in the mirror with no one to perform for. And the truth is, without your energy, their illusion crumbles. They can't project without a surface. And you became glass, transparent, unreachable, gone. Let's not forget, narcissists don't miss you. They miss control. They miss the spotlight. They miss the emotional supply. But what you did was a masterclass. You starved their ego while feeding their fantasy. And when the fantasy could no longer be maintained, you walked. You were never weak. You were never stupid. You were strategic. You played your part until the script collapsed on its own. They thought they were the puppeteer, but by the end, you were standing backstage, holding the scissors, and with one clean, final snip, you exited the stage. No applause, no explanation, just silence and peace. And if anyone's reading this, still stuck in that performance, still clapping to keep the peace, just know you don't have to yell to be powerful. You don't have to fight to be free. All you have to do is watch and wait and walk, because their narcissism isn't your prison. It's your camouflage. And the moment you stop reacting, stop feeding, stop playing your role, that's the moment the curtain falls, and they'll never even know who cut the lights. Number 7, you didn't burn the bridge. You just stopped holding it up and watched them light the match with their own lies. They handed you the matchbook, expecting you to set the fire. But you just walked away and let their ego do what it always does, destroy everything it touches. You were never the villain in this story. You were the structure, the foundation, the quiet force keeping it all from crumbling. And when you left, you didn't slam doors, toss grenades, or start shouting matches. You did something far more powerful. You stepped back with your dignity, with your silence, and let gravity and truth do the rest. They wanted you to lose it, to snap, to make it ugly, so they could say, "See, look how crazy they are." But that's not your style. You don't deal in cheap drama. You deal in consequences. And the best consequence you delivered, your absence. No more explaining, no more covering for their mess. No more being the emotional janitor cleaning up after their chaos. They lit the fire. You just stopped putting it out. Every time you stayed calm when they twisted your words, they thought you were weak. Every time you walked away from baited arguments, they thought they'd won. What they didn't realize was that you were letting their own patterns bury them deeper. They destroyed the bridge, thinking they'd still have access. But bridges don't burn from one end. And when you stepped off, the whole thing collapsed under the weight of their own lies. That's what made it devastating. It wasn't that you screamed or exposed them. It was that you didn't. You left with so much peace, it looked like power. Because it was. People noticed. They always do when someone exits quietly but clean. No bitterness, no explosions, just truth left hanging in the air like smoke that won't clear. And suddenly, those same people who once questioned you began to wonder, wait, why did they leave? Because now, without your presence keeping the illusion stable, the truth began leaking through the cracks. The stories didn't line up anymore. The mask slipped. The charm started looking like control. The jokes started sounding like jabs. You weren't holding their secrets anymore, and that silence, it started speaking. You were never interested in revenge, because revenge implies they still hold space in your world. But you weren't looking back. You weren't throwing stones. You were packing peace and letting karma do the talking. And that's what scorched them, not your rage, but your grace. The kind that doesn't need an audience, the kind that doesn't need applause, the kind that walks away fully healed and leaves them standing in the wreckage of their own creation, alone. Let's be clear, you didn't walk away because you were weak. You walked away because you were done. Done being the emotional support system for someone who fed off your light. Done translating your pain to people fluent in gaslighting. Done explaining yourself to people who were committed to misunderstanding you. You held the matchbook, yes, but you never needed to use it. They lit it themselves with every lie, every projection, every manipulation. You just got smart enough to step back before the whole thing went up in flames. And now they're coughing in the smoke, wondering why everyone's finally starting to see through the mask. Because without your energy to keep it shiny, that mask started melting. People ask, don't you want to warn others about them? You don't have to. The truth always reveals itself, and when it does, your silence becomes a map for others to follow. You weren't the destroyer, you were the witness, and when the dust settles and the smoke clears, the story will remain exactly as it should. You didn't set the fire, you just had the wisdom to get out before it spread. And now the world finally sees you weren't the problem. You were the proof. Number 8. You let them think you were broken, while you built the exit they never saw coming. You wore your scars like camouflage, let them mistake your silence for surrender, and while they celebrated your defeat, you were already gone. They looked at you and saw a shell. Tired eyes, quiet voice, slumped shoulders. To them, that was the end. But what they didn't realize was, that was your beginning. You weren't broken. You were calculating. You weren't lost. You were in position. And the role you played, that wasn't weakness. That was warfare. You let them believe the story they needed to feel powerful. Let them see a version of you they could label as helpless, drained, nothing without them. And you leaned in, not because it was true, but because it gave you cover. The quieter you became, the louder their arrogance grew. And while they were inflating their ego, you were slipping through the cracks they didn't even know existed. That's the danger of underestimating someone who knows how to act. You stopped pushing, you stopped resisting, you stopped explaining, and they took that as surrender. But you weren't giving up. You were conserving power, because you knew if you made a scene, they'd weaponize it. If you screamed, they'd twist it. If you ran, they'd chase, so you vanished instead. You let the lights dim. You let the illusion set in. You stopped being a threat, so they stopped watching closely. And that's when you moved. You didn't need a dramatic climax. You didn't owe them a firework finale. You knew what they'd do with that. They'd call it crazy, call you unstable, use it to repaint themselves as the victim. So instead, you delivered the one thing they could never manipulate, a silent exit, so smooth it looked accidental. They still can't pinpoint when you left. They scroll your profile, reread old texts, check timestamps like detectives chasing a ghost. But that's the point. You didn't walk out of their life. You dissolved out of their control. Let's be real. They never saw you. They only saw what they could get from you. So when you stopped giving, they stopped paying attention. And while their attention was turned inward to their next performance, their next manipulation, their next audience, you were already emotionally unreachable. That's why they're still spinning, because the weak version of you they ridiculed, that was the version plotting their irrelevance. You healed in the shadows, rebuilt yourself in silence, and by the time you were done, you were untouchable. Not just physically absent, but spiritually unavailable. They tried to bait you back, tried to push the same buttons, but you'd already disconnected the wiring. They no longer had access to your soul, and it's eating them alive. Think about it. They thought they broke you, but all they did was break the illusion that you needed them. And that illusion, that was their lifeline. You didn't take revenge. You took yourself, your light, your energy, your validation. And without that, they're nothing but noise in an empty room. They're still talking to the version of you that never existed, the fragile version they invented so they could feel big. But that version, you buried it. And from that grave, you built the foundation of your new life. No dramatic exits, no warnings, no last words, just the soft click of a door closing in the background, and the haunting silence of someone who walked away and never looked back. That's what makes it brutal. Not that you left, but how you left. Without rage, without guilt, without giving them a single thread to pull on. So if you're still in that role right now, still pretending to be weak, still playing along while plotting your next move, don't let shame creep in. That's not weakness. That's strategy. You're not stuck. You're just silent for now. And when it's time to go, go so quietly they never hear the door. Only the echo of their own arrogance bouncing off the walls. Number 9. You didn't say goodbye. You graduated from a lesson that was never meant to last forever. You didn't leave. You leveled up. And while they were busy planning your ending, you were packing your cap and gown in silence. They thought your exit was emotional. They thought it was about them. But they were only a side character in a chapter you had long outgrown. Because this wasn't a collapse. This was a ceremony. You didn't storm out of their dysfunction. You rose from it, and what looked like distance was actually destiny unfolding in perfect, divine timing. Let them talk. Let them spin it. Let them pretend you were too sensitive, too difficult, too much. Because they needed to minimize your evolution in order to justify their stagnation. But you didn't just walk out of that cycle, you transcended it. And now they're stuck rereading a script that no longer includes your name. You didn't abandon them, you stopped abandoning yourself. You didn't ghost them, you graduated past the frequency of their drama. Because you had stayed long enough to collect the lessons, every red flag, every gaslight, every moment where you sacrificed your voice just to keep the peace. You studied all of it until the test became clear. Could you leave without needing to be understood? Could you outgrow their dysfunction without needing them to validate your pain? And you did. You passed with flying colors, not because you shouted louder, but because you finally learned to listen to yourself. See, they expected you to stay stuck, stay small, stay silent. They never imagined you'd step out of that emotional prison without chains clinking behind you, because while they were busy being the lesson, you became the graduate. Not in rage, not in chaos, not with a middle finger or a meltdown, but with grace, clarity, power. You didn't just leave the room, you outgrew the entire building. And now, you walk like someone who remembers every moment they bent to survive and refuses to bend ever again. They don't get it, and they won't, because they were too busy scripting your downfall to realize you were writing your own beginning. They expected a scene, you gave them silence. They expected tears, you gave them transformation. They expected revenge, you gave them distance so loud it echoes in their ego. Let's be clear, this wasn't your downfall. This was your ascension, your emotional diploma, your moment of sacred evolution. Because you realized the closure you were waiting for, it was never coming from them. It came the moment you stopped trying to be heard in a space designed to silence you. And the power of that moment, it changed you forever. So now they ask themselves, what happened to you? And the answer is simple. You healed. You found your peace and made it permanent. You closed the chapter, not with fire, but with finality. And the most haunting thing of all, you never looked back. You don't need to defend it. You don't need to post a paragraph. You don't need a closing argument. Because your life, your glow, your peace, your refusal to engage is the loudest truth of all. You were never meant to stay in that room. You were meant to pass through it, to witness the dysfunction, to learn from the betrayal, to honor the pain, and then walk out of it reborn. This wasn't goodbye. This was graduation. And what did you take with you? Not the trauma, not the bitterness, but the strength, the clarity, the knowing that you'll never again lower your vibration to meet someone in the chaos they refuse to leave. You are unshakable now, not because nothing hurts, but because you know who you are when it does. You are undeniable now, not because you crave approval, but because you no longer need it. You are unavailable to dysfunction now, not because you're cold, but because your boundaries are finally non-negotiable. So if you're still in the process, still questioning, still second-guessing if you should stay just a little longer, let this be your confirmation. The lesson is over, the door is open, and your next level is waiting. You don't need a breakdown to leave. You don't need an audience. You don't need them to understand. You just need to decide that your evolution is more important than their comfort. And once you make that decision, you don't walk, you rise. Chosen one, your exit wasn't a goodbye. It was a graduation. And the diploma is written in peace, purpose, and a life they'll never again have access to. And so, let this be the reminder they never wanted you to hear. You didn't just survive what they did, you evolved beyond it. Your silence was power, your exit was strategy, and your growth is the revenge they never saw coming. You didn't leave broken, you left reborn. If this message lit something inside you, like, subscribe, and drop 77 in the comments to claim your strength. And don't keep this to yourself. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because truth like this It's not just yours to hold. It's light we all need.